An old fisherman dreams of escaping and marrying a young, beautiful mermaid, and he finally manages to catch one. But when his wife discovers his secret, his fantasy turns into a nightmare. Herb smiles while he's underwater, enjoying the cold water against his skin, but in reality, he's just submerged from the chest down in the bathtub, completely ignoring the noise around him. You're watching Cine Digest, and this is Movie Recapped. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more awesome stories. After a while, his wife yells at him, confused about why he left the kettle boiling. Herb tries to ignore her, but when she keeps calling his name, he angrily screams underwater and slams the tub before getting out to answer her. Irritated, Herb turns off the stopwatch because he was training himself to hold his breath for longer periods. He quickly gets dressed and heads downstairs. He calls out his wife's name several times, but there's no response. When he reaches the kitchen, he finds the garden door open and his wife nowhere to be seen. As he looks out the window, he sees Joan opening the shed and discovering something so horrifying that she can only gasp in shock. The day before, Herb had loaded his fishing gear into the car and sat in the driver's seat. Before he could leave, his wife Joan rushed over, which annoyed him. She reminded him about the Earth Care meeting that night, since she had already told the neighbors they would both attend. He didn't want to go, and instead of answering, he stared at the mermaid-shaped charm hanging from the rearview mirror. Sensing his hesitation, she insisted the gathering would be good for him. Herb ignored her words and only promised he'd be back at night. He even asked for a good luck kiss, but the indifferent woman just waved her hand, so he drove off. At the local marina, Herb walked along the long pier carrying his folding chair and fishing gear, excited as he set up his chosen spot. When two fishermen saw him, they sarcastically asked how he was doing. Unaware of their mockery, Herb told them he was going to find what he was looking for today. The other men laughed and told him he'd been saying the same thing for days with no luck. He apologized, saying the water had been rough before. They joked that maybe mermaids don't like that kind of weather. Despite their laughter, Herb stayed optimistic that he'd catch something special today. He cast his line into the calm water. By sunset, the men said goodbye and left, while he stayed behind, still standing there, unable to catch anything, gripping the fishing rod. Constant failure and judgment filled his mind. After a long moment of thought, he decided to pack up and head home.
As he walked along the pier, he heard a deep sound, stopped, and looked back. He dropped his gear and tried to locate the source of the strange noise. That night, Herb dragged a large, slimy bag all the way to his house, trying to stay quiet so Joan wouldn't know he came back early. After a while, he took a swig from a flask and turned on the garden hose. Then he returned, happy and dancing around the hose that ran into the shed. Inside, water was filling a small plastic tub where he had placed the mermaid he had recently caught, tied up and gagged so she couldn't escape. She angrily thrashed her tail, but Herb thought she was upset because he left her, so he apologized and said he hadn't taken long to prepare the tank. The sea creature flipped her tail again and tried to free herself from the ropes and chains around her arms. But the more she moved, the more excited he became, staring curiously at her chest and stiff neck. Annoyed, she splashed him in the face with her tail, snapping him out of his sick thoughts. Herb scolded her, saying they wouldn't be friends if she kept being rude. He carefully reached out and removed the gag so she could talk, but the mermaid bared extremely sharp teeth and let out a piercing scream. Joan heard the strange sound from inside the house, but when she paused the TV and focused, she heard thunder in the background. She assumed the noise was from an incoming storm and kept watching. At the same time, the mermaid kept screaming and violently thrashing in the water. Herb ran to turn on a record, hoping to drown out the screams that were ringing in his ears. At that moment, Joan went downstairs and nervously looked out the kitchen window, realizing the sound was coming from the shed. As he played the vinyl, the mermaid's screams shattered the light bulb. The shed was plunged into complete darkness, but the music kept playing loudly, which calmed her down a bit.
At that moment, a snake-like appendage slowly emerged from behind her head, glowing like an anglerfish lure, tempting its prey. Mesmerized by the soft light filling the space, Herb moved closer. Confused by his stare, she watched as he admired her face. Once she calmed down, Herb decided to leave the shed, but was startled to see Joan standing outside. He casually told her she scared him and walked toward the house to distract her, but his wife confronted him about missing the meeting.
He lied and said the tide was high, forcing him to stay at the marina and keep fishing. Joan told him it was already dark and he shouldn't be fishing at all. He wrapped his arm around her to calm her down, but she pushed him away. She was tired of his strange obsession with mermaids and told him to stop trying to catch one. Calmly, he promised to quit fishing and hugged her. Joan accepted the hug, not knowing he had already caught his prize. The next morning, Herb went to a public pool to practice swimming, but his age and body made it hard for him to swim at a decent speed, and he struggled getting in and out of the water. Still, he was determined to live out his underwater fantasy, so he kept training himself to hold his breath. He continued at home in the bathtub, timing his progress with a stopwatch. He was happy when he saw he could hold his breath longer than before, but it still wasn't enough to swim with the mermaid he caught, so he submerged his head again and tried once more. That afternoon, Joan was gardening when she saw Herb struggling to carry several food cans. She went to help him, but he stopped her and said he was fine, then rushed into the shed. That only increased her suspicions. Inside the building, Herb dumped the canned meat into the water to feed the mermaid. She refused to eat anything. Still, he tried opening another can with a knife. When she saw the sharp blade, she panicked and started thrashing again, scratching his neck while hissing. Despite the pain, Herb told her not to do that again. He even called her princess and encouraged her to eat something. Looking at the empty cans and the soggy food in the tub, he realized she might want something more natural. Later, Joan was chopping vegetables while fish fried behind her. Herb walked in and kissed her. Unfortunately, that made her notice the fresh scratch on his neck. She said nothing, and he left the kitchen without a word and went back to the shed. As he walked away, Joan noticed the empty tuna cans and cat food he had thrown in the trash. She ignored it for the moment and went back to the pan, only to realize the fish she was frying was gone, without knowing her husband had stolen it as he passed by. That night, while Herb was training in the bathtub, Joan noticed he didn't even react to the kettle whistle. She took the chance to see what he was hiding in the shed. She quietly opened the door and looked inside, but instead of a mermaid, she found a young woman crying, tied up and gagged with her legs wrapped in plastic to look like a fishtail, begging for help. As she looked around, Joan saw for the first time the photos and articles Herb had collected about mermaids. That's when she realized his obsession had driven him to kidnap a human being, believing she was a mythical creature. Now knowing how disturbed her husband truly was, she cautiously approached the terrified captive, unsure if she could trust her. The girl relaxed when Joan removed the gag, but panicked when she saw her kidnapper enter. Joan realized Herb had arrived, and she slowly turned to face her worst fear. At the same time, the man locked the door, trapping both of them inside the shed. Joan cried and confronted him about what he'd done. With crazed eyes and a disturbing smile, he told her to enjoy what he had caught. Terrified, she cursed at him and rushed to untie the girl. He warned her that the creature would bite her if she got close, but she said that wouldn't happen. That's when Joan realized her husband truly believed he had caught a real mermaid, and she screamed at him that he was sick in the head. But he misunderstood her, thinking she meant the creature he loved was sick. Afraid she would die, he assumed the reason was that he was giving her fresh water instead of salt water like her natural environment.
He shoved Joan aside, causing her to hit her head on the ground. The blow knocked her unconscious by accident, but the captive thought he had killed his wife. Horrified, the girl screamed as he grabbed her. He then dragged her to the marina, her legs still wrapped in plastic. Herb stood her at the water's edge, hugged her from behind, and promised she would be fine. Unable to escape, her terrifying screams cut through the cold air. When he rubbed his face in her hair and calmly told her they were going home, she went silent. She didn't resist as he pushed her into the freezing water, surrendering to her fate. The deranged fisherman jumped in after her, ready to live out his twisted fantasy of escaping with a beautiful mermaid. But he managed to reach the surface while the girl couldn't. Moments later, Herb heard police sirens in the distance, meaning Joan had woken up and reported him. Sadly, it may have already been too late for his captive as she drowned helplessly in the depths. And that's the end of today's movie. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Cinedigest for more amazing stories with Movie Recapped.